Hello, welcome back on the stage of the Luxembourg Sustainability Forum, and this year's edition is dealing with biodiversity issues. This is a very specific encounter we will make now with Marie-Monique Robin. Her name is probably familiar to you because she's an investigative journalist, she's a filmmaker and author who is well known that she won't go back and be deterred by any obstacle. And her method gave her the prestigious awards. And of course, you know from her books, The World According to Monsanto. But her topic today is biodiversity, and especially the links between biodiversity and human health. In her book, The Pandemics Factory, published this year with La Découverte, she mentions that if nothing is done in order to halt ecosystem destruction, we will experience more destructive pandemics than before. Marie-Monique Robin, like always, is now dealing with shooting a film, a documentary about this book, and you will be able to see it in the Grand Duchy in the next spring. This is an IMS exclusivity. She accepted to answer our questions last Friday in Paris. Marie-Monique Robin, hello. Hello. This is a book which is really flabbergasting and very well documented. The Pandemics Factory, and with you we see high-flying scientists from the world over, and they all say the same in the end, actually, that we are entering an era of pandemics, of epidemics, or even pandemics, and this is really frightening. And we can't think of human health without understanding ecosystems, without a proper understanding of them. You are back from the USA, you are headed for Ethiopia to meet scientists. It's a bit like for the World According to Monsanto. You are going to gather the whistleblowers in order to voice their concerns for them. Yes, what is sure that I asked 62 scientists from the 5 continents, and anthropologists, veterinarians, physicians, parasitologists, and they all say they pertain to a discipline which is called in English disease ecology. I would call it health ecology, and this is kind of an umbrella discipline where everyone has his own field of specialty, but where knowledge is shared in order to characterize the major challenges of today, the climate disruption, but also destruction of biodiversity, which is directly linked to pandemics and epidemics. And of course, issues of poverty and inequalities, because this is all linked. They are whistleblowers indeed, because for the past 20 years they have been saying the same, and they are very happy that I have gathered them. They knew about what the others' work, but they had not necessarily met, and they say, beware, if we go on destroying biodiversity in tropical areas where we have the last hotspots of plant and animal biodiversity, we are ahead or heading for major health issues and crises much worse than the current pandemic. And there were epidemics before, or zoonoses, that is illnesses, diseases which are transmitted by animals, from animals to humans. There are examples, Ebola or AIDS. AIDS was originally an emerging zoonosis, but MERS, the first SARS, and Zika, Nipah, chikungunya, this is a long list, and the WHO says that until the 1960s we have an infectious disease every 5 years, and now we have, or 15 years, and now we have 5 new diseases emerging every year. And they were waiting for someone to do this work. Yes, this link between biodiversity biodiversity and human health is unknown or very poorly known, and the way in which biodiversity loss can lead to zoonoses and pandemics. Pathogens are not distributed by chance. There are many pathogens where you have a lot of wildlife in tropical areas. But if you're there, I was in the French Amazon recently with a scientist, Mr. Gosselin, who is a researcher, and he said, look, there are 630 mosquito species whirring around us, but we won't be worried because from the 630, only 2 are able to sting humans. The Anopheles, where you can get malaria from, and tiger mosquito, where you can get yellow fever or Zika. But this huge biodiversity reduces the risks. It's the so-called dilution effect. Because if you have a lot of biodiversity, you have a lot of pathogens which are potentially dangerous for humans, but there is such huge biodiversity that dilutes the risk. And this paradigm of the dilution effect has been described by 2 scientists from the US about the Lyme disease. And if you fragment, they show that if you fragment an American forest by building roads, you have only small plots of forest, and you will favor the proliferation of a rodent who carries the bacterium which infects the ticks, which will infect the humans in turn, and this is the so-called white-footed mouse. And if you fragment the forest, the super predators will disappear and all other mammals will live, including specialized rodents which are specialized in ecological niches, and this will favor the proliferation of white-footed mice, and the loss of biodiversity will lead to that. And a lot of biodiversity dilutes risks for vector-borne diseases, for malaria, Lyme disease, but also for non-vector-borne diseases. And our intrusion, the humans' intrusions into tropical forests, because we build roads, we have monocultures, there's some mining going on. And what leads a region, an area to become favorable for the emergence of infectious diseases? So, because emergence areas are where there is some mining and tropical forest logging. This was said of AIDS, because in the middle of the 19th century, when Africa was colonized, the virus emerged and developed very slowly, and then very much later became what we know. And then transgenic soybean is grown to feed cattle in Luxembourg. You have palm oil being cultivated to fill your tanks, or the import of Brazilian beef. According to the so-called free trade agreements, this will increase infectious risks because there is some deforestation and destruction of biotopes going on. You can't separate animal health, wildlife health, domestic animals' health, and human health into the biosphere health. And we are heading for a major disaster otherwise, and the future pandemics can be much more dangerous than this one. I was recently in Uganda, and you have the Ebola virus, which is transmitted to humans who consume bush meat, and the virus is lethal to 70 to 90%. It's 7 to 9 times more lethal than the COVID virus. And the Ebola epidemics started in December 1973, that is 2 years after deforestation. So if you use maps, scientists you've asked and you talk to show that after deforestation you can expect virus emergence or virus emerging within 2 years. And this is incredible how tight it is linked. Yes, CNRS, a researcher who does research in Thailand, in Asia and the Pacific area, took the map for the past 50 years of infectious in areas where infections erupted, diseases erupted, and he matched it with a map of deforestation and the map of endangered species or nearly extinct species, and the superimposition matched. And the Zika virus, and the Nipah virus emerged in Malaysia. We can perhaps elaborate on this because there are many factors, but they are man-made, mostly typical for our era, the Anthropocene epoch. But it would be interesting to have the causal chain. Well, this virus appeared in 1997. Deforestation on the island of Borneo, the deforestation of a primary forest, virgin forest, in order to have palm crops. And bats were there, and I love bats. They are really wonderful animals, but they are so-called virus reservoirs. Well, these are the only mammals which are able to fly, and their metabolism is very special. It's a feed. They had a high temperature, and this enables them to be healthy carriers of reservoirs for a huge quantity of viruses. But if you destroy their habitats, if they have to flee, they get under stress, and specialists measure the stress hormones in bats in their urine and feces, and if they excrete, they can shed the virus on wildlife. Underneath, in my story, they flee to the Malaysian coast because they are fruit-eating bats, and there are mango monocultures above huge industrial piggeries, pig farms, and they eat the mangoes. Contaminated mangoes fall off the trees, and in Nipah, this is the place where this all started. They contaminated the pigs, and then the farm workers got it, because we share 95% of our genetic material with pigs. If you want to humanize rapidly a virus emanating from bats, because you always need an intermediary host between the bat and humans, and if it is a pig, this will be very convenient, and the disease was transmitted to people who died because Nipah is highly dangerous. Farm workers got it, and then this is very ironic because in Malaysia they are Muslims, they don't eat pigs. These were destined for export to Singapore. So the virus went on board the ship with the pigs, and it even went as far as China. And if we look at infectious diseases which have emerged in the past 40 years, we see deforestation, industrial farming, especially animal farming, which is a catalyzer, and this is always the epidemiologic combination. Yes, these are the three main factors. Urbanization as well is a trigger. It is like intensive farming. You have huge human concentrations with people who live in subhuman conditions. And this is like a petri dish. It's a biological ticking bomb. And this is like humans. If you have concentrations, viruses can adapt and mutate and come to and lead to an epidemic. Well, we see that these reservoir animals, there are domestic or farm animals which will have a bridging function between wildlife and humans. And with regard to COVID-19, this causal chain is still unclear. My book will be published as a paperback soon, and I'm writing a postface, and I resumed my studies for 1 month in order to refresh my knowledge. And on the contrary to the first SARS, which was in 2003, where we had found the intermediate host, which was the masked palm civet, we couldn't find the intermediate host animal. And there are very strong assumptions that the virus which originates from bats, have been manipulated in a Wuhan lab and has come out of the lab because of a lack in security. And this is growing ever more credible. And this doesn't change anything to what I've been saying, because why did... Now, this is the main topic. Why do they have a high security lab in Wuhan or in Gabon, in the Gabon, in Franceville? Because we humans force the viruses to get out of the woods because of anthropic pressure, and you have so-called biosecurity. People want to follow up the viruses in bats. They want to sequence the genome of the viruses in the hope of finding a vaccine before the virus gets out. But scientists say this is not the way we are going to protect ourselves from future epidemics. These viruses are highly dangerous, and even more so if they are manipulated. So we need to eliminate causes for biodiversity destruction, climate change, and infectious risk, which comes from this. We need to understand and make understand that everything is interlinked. If we take the right actions, the right measures, we can tackle the three major issues which are characteristic of the Anthropocene. This is a triple win situation, win-win-win. And I say, what are we waiting for still? It would be good for the planet, but more especially for us, because the planet can do without us. But this would allow us to solve the three major issues. And this is the One Health approach. You call it so in your book. Yes, the One Health approach is carried by the UN organization because veterinarians and physicians have said it's ridiculous to work separately. We need to get out of this silo mindset. As scientists, virologists are only interested in viruses. We need excellent virologists, but they need to work together with parasitologists, immunologists, in order to find joint solutions to these major issues we are dealing with. And this goes also for governments as well. Agriculture doesn't know what the health department does, etc., and the environment department. But there is an approach which is even more comprehensive than One Health, is planetary health. And this concept of planetary health has been promoted by the Rockefeller Foundation, and it goes even further than One Health. It not only veterinarians and physicians, because in this whole fresco we need to take into account climate disruption, poverty. This is highly important. I was in the Gabon recently. You can't say the villagers who live in the midst of the tropical forest, who don't have any crop farming or animal farming, you can't tell them stop hunting or eating bushmeat, otherwise they would starve. And we can't protect biodiversity efficiently if we don't aim at fighting poverty. And planetary health is an approach which is comprehensive and takes this into account as well as urbanization. They make recommendations to governments and international organizations in order for them to find solutions perfectly. And we need to rethink our economic models, because we need to internalize so-called negative externalities. Companies have a part to play. Of course, companies have a part to play, because ecosystems, human health and animal health can be dissociated. And if you're a company, you can't go on logging and in order to plant palm trees in order to export oil to Europe. In the mid to long term, this has a huge impact on water resources, on the climate, on human health. And you can't separate, because the mid to long-term impacts of our activities must be taken into consideration. We must have a holistic vision of the economy, and reconnect all this. Now we are experiencing a lot of conferences. There is the COP26 on climate, the biodiversity conference. Are you hopeful about the so-called post-COVID area? Well, after having read your book, I don't think this is the right way of putting it. Or do you think we will resume business as always or as before? I say very often it's too late to be pessimistic. One thing is sure, I've been working on these issues for decades, and this is really an emergency. You have probably read the IPCC report for climate and biodiversity. The situation is terrifying. 1 million endangered species from 8 million which have been identified. We are mammals. We are vertebrates. We need to be aware of that. And if vertebrates go on becoming extinct as fast as now, we won't be able to escape this global extinction. The sixth mass extinction, well, there is no reason why we should escape it if we live in a world where there is no biodiversity left. I understood from the scientists that biodiversity and climate are internally linked, and biodiversity is our joint house. This is a phrase used by Pope Francis, and I liked it. If we destroy the house, we won't be able to live in it anymore. It is really absolutely necessary. We can go on destroying it, but it's not good for businesses, because this will have a boomerang effect, and we're going to pay a very high price: climate disruption, food shortages, infectious diseases, which will be ever more numerous if we don't change tax, and tropical diseases. There is a major discovery. When you destroy biodiversity in one place, and here especially, because we seal off surfaces, our children grow up with those trees in a very clinically clean environment, so they have a very frail immunity, and they are exposed to inflammatory diseases like asthma, allergies, food intolerances, and these are possibly aggravating factors for comorbidities to COVID-19. And this is really amazing, because everything is interlinked, and you see how this could happen, because chronic diseases in our countries are due to loss of biodiversity, like obesity or diabetes. They make us much more vulnerable to viruses which have emerged in tropical areas. And now we understand the causes, we know how this works, so we need to act. We need to act very fast, and COVID-19 is only a warning shot, I'm afraid. Thank you so much, Marie-Monique Robin. This was really mesmerizing, and you contributed to our last issue of Sustainability Mag, which is published by IMS Luxembourg, with a highly interesting op-ed, and I'm very keen on to discover your next documentary, and this will help raising awareness and changing the software in our heads, changing mindsets. I'd like to stress that. And I think you are still waiting for some funds. Yes, 15% of the budget are still lacking, because I wanted to make a very good documentary, and you can there is some crowdfunding, mr2films.com. You can go to the website and donate. And French artist, comedian Juliette Binoche will help me with this movie. She's a beautiful woman, and she will convey the message very well. Thank you for your help. Thank you to you, Marie-Monique Robin, and all the best. Well, welcome back. I think this topic is really enthralling. It's fascinating to see the links, why destruction of forests has an impact on biodiversity and biodiversity loss has an impact on health. You need to establish links and understand the relations between different factors, understand why every single action counts and how everything is interrelated. If we forbid straws, drinking straws made of plastics, does it help? Yes, it counts. All these small steps we can make in companies, as individuals, all tend to this common aim. And if I come back to what we've just heard, and if we consider that 2 years after massive forest destruction, a pandemic will emerge. We have destroyed 40 times the surface area of Luxembourg in Australia through wildfires. So are we expecting the next pandemic from Australia? Because somewhere 1 billion animals were killed and 3 million animals have been put under stress, and we have heard that bats which are under stress will excrete and shed the viruses they have. So we need to establish links and understand the impact we are having on the planet as citizens as well as entrepreneurs. We need to understand as well how we can help. You've had a very articulate demonstration of the way in which forest biodiversity and diseases are interlinked. But now I'd like to share with you a more artistic take on things, rather poetic, but also sad vision of things, which will show how all this is integrated, but without words, only with pictures. And you will see how everything is linked with our well-known artist Natasha Tsakos, who was with us 2 years ago. She gave us this video. In the end, there is a small icon with silence, and this long-lasting silence is for you, for us, to reflect, to do some introspection and to think of what we could do differently. The floor is to Natasha Tsakos.